welcome to the National Pulse. I'm Raheem Kassam, editor-in-chief of thenationalpulse.com. The revolution is the point. Those are the opening words from a new article by our guest today, Dr. Matthew J. Peterson, the Vice President of Education at the Claremont Institute, and he's the editor of an extremely important publication, The American Mind. Dr. Peterson contests in his must-read new article that Black Lives Matter and Antifa together are nothing but domestic terror groups led by radicals who seek to rip America apart. And as I said on this show yesterday, that the reason Joe Biden can't condemn their actions is because they are his base. And the left's own reports and documents openly state as much, or at least that Biden needs them to be his base. The Transition Integrity Project's pathway for Biden to steal the election makes as much clear on its 9th page. I'll read that for you at the end of this monologue. But because we have new viewers every day, I want to remind you all what this is. On August the 3rd, Natalie Winters and I published an article which explained there was an impending attempt to delegitimize the election, coming from the far left and their big corporate backers. George Soros, the Berggruen Institute, the Gates Foundation, and a handful of never-Trump operatives within the Republican Party, they created a front group called the Transition Integrity Project. They claim they are non-partisan or bipartisan. They use those words interchangeably, although they mean different things. They say their raison d'etre is that Trump will try to steal the election, so they have to do something about it. Oh yeah, they're tied to the Chinese Communist Party too. This group has had an avalanche of positive press coverage from the New York Times to local papers to Vox to Atlantic Magazine and more. They're being heralded as saviors of this election. Except their whole planning document is an attack on the norms we have known in American elections for a very, very long time. The Transition Integrity Project makes no bones about its scorn for the Electoral College, and we know why. The Electoral College prevents mob rule. It prevents the coastal elites running roughshod over what they call flyover country. And it was specifically designed to do so. In other words, it was intended to stop the tyranny of the majority and mob rule. But the Transition Integrity Project unironically accuses the right of opposing America's norms, while they say this about the Electoral College, quote, TIP recognizes and shares the view that the Electoral College is profoundly anti-democratic and that numerous long-standing practices also function to create structural biases in our voting system. For present purposes, however, these constraints are treated as given. End quote. You've heard it on this show before, but you're not watching a repeat. I'm going to keep hammering this point every single day between now and November the 3rd and probably beyond. In addition to objecting to the Electoral College, a constitutional necessity, they take aim at more recent norms within the US political system, the norm of election night. On page 2 of their document, the Transition Integrity Project says of election night, quote, the concept of election night is no longer accurate and is indeed dangerous. We face a period of contestation stretching from the first day a ballot is cast in mid-September until January 20th. The winner may not, and we assess likely will not, be known on election night, as officials count mail-in ballots. This period of uncertainty provides opportunities for an unscrupulous candidate to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the process and to set up an unprecedented assault on the outcome. Campaigns, parties, the press, and the public must be educated to adjust expectations starting immediately. End quote. And of course, in lockstep with the demands of this Soros-run group, the media has parroted these lines over the past few days. And that's because they're panicked. This is their panic button. Accuse Trump of doing precisely the thing that they're trying to do, steal the election. I told you yesterday how Hawkfish, the DNC analytics firm, suggested Trump could win on election night in a landslide, their words, but then have the vote reversed. by cascades of mail-in ballots that would magically emerge over the next week. Just like they accused Trump of foreign collusion, which he never did, they're accusing Trump of trying to steal an election that they themselves are trying to steal. Remember, it was them with the foreign collusion background. Their non-partisan report says that Trump is going to try and pardon everyone around him, including himself, to start a foreign war, to destroy evidence, they don't say what evidence, and disrupt any peaceful transition to power for the Democrats. It's an outright fantasy, and it's deeply dangerous in and of itself. And while on one page accusing Trump supporters of being violent and with no evidence, they claim Trump supporters will even infiltrate left-wing peaceful protests to stage violence, well, on the very next page, they effectively demand a left-wing siege of the White House. And we know that's coming. And on pages 5 and 13 of their report, they demand social media and the establishment media try to stack the decks against Trump in the aftermath of the election. Quote, social media platforms should also elevate trustworthy officials and accurate information, remove lies and disinformation, and refuse to give voice to those provoking or organizing violent action. End quote. That's precisely what Mark Zuckerberg announced today. Facebook said this morning that they will suppress anyone who is claiming victory on election day. That means Trump and his supporters. Because remember, Biden and that crowd, they want to wait until way after election day. So who are these trustworthy officials? Themselves, of course. Rosa Brooks and Niels Gilman of Soros's Open Society Group and the Chinese Communist Party-linked Berggruen Institute. Those trustworthy officials. Gilman even gave a comment to Vox on August the 18th, where he remarked upon how important it was that the media companies decide on who the next president is going to be. I'm struggling to find that part in my copy of the US Constitution. Here's the quote from Gilman. He said, it's actually ultimately Lachlan and Rupert Murdoch who are going to decide. Those guys on the evening lineup check in with the boss, so the question really is, what will those senior leaders be willing to countenance? Quote again, likewise, what is Mark Zuckerberg going to be willing to countenance in terms of the propagation of nonsense on Facebook? Right now, there hasn't been a lot of indication from either the Murdochs or Zuckerberg that they're willing to put any limits on what's going to be said, so that's a deep concern. End quote. That's what Niels Gilman said on August the 3rd. That'd be the same Rupert Murdoch and Mark Zuckerberg, by the way, who run sister organizations backing open borders and mass migration. We'll get to that in the next couple of blocks with Natalie Winters. Sounds trustworthy to me. And that brings me back to my opening point about the mobs. The Transition Integrity Project warns about Trump supporters taking to the streets on one page, and on the next page they demand this, quote, if there's a crisis, almost every strategy to protect the democratic process is dependent on mass mobilization, and in particular on people taking peacefully to the streets in large numbers, potentially for an extended period. Large base-building groups on the progressive side will need to anchor this strategy, but their success will likely depend on supporting and resourcing new and emerging racial justice leaders, many of whom are not affiliated with formal institutions and coalitions, end quote. The left doesn't know how to take peacefully to the streets. This is an open call for mob violence from Soros, from Gates, the Chinese Communist Party, and the Never Trumpers. It's an attempt at a coup. And how do you know this? Because on page 10, they say this, quote, in one instance, Team Biden's strategy in anticipation of an ultimate loss was to strengthen its hand in order to negotiate a package of structural reforms to the democratic system, including making DC and Puerto Rico states, abolishing the Electoral College, and requiring Supreme Court justices to retire at 70, end quote. So remind me who's attacking the norms again? And lastly, on page 9, they say, open quotes, the scale of recent demonstrations has increased the stakes for the Democratic Party to build strong ties with grassroots organizations and be responsive to the movement's demands. They want the mobs as Joe Biden's base. That whole document will be up on the National Pulse website over the course of this show with my annotations for you all to read, to download, to share, and more. I want this to go to all of your representatives all across the country. After the break, we'll be joined by Dr. Matthew Peterson from the Claremont Institute and the American Mind website, and we'll be asking him how this coup d'etat will unfold. This is the National Pulse, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the National Pulse. Well, when I find a really great article, as you people know about me so far from this show and from the War Room, I print it, I annotate it, I highlight it, and this is the article we'll be discussing with our guest, Dr. Matthew Peterson from the Claremont Institute and the American Mind website. It's called The Racial Marxism of BLM, Black Lives Matter. Dr. Peterson joins us now. Dr. Peterson, thank you so much for joining us here today live on the National Pulse.
Raheem, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Peterson's a hard guy to get on just simply because of the time difference, but I understand he's on a different coast, so we're very grateful to be able to be joined by him today. There's so much to go through here. I've highlighted so much of your article, and I really commend it to the audience here. I wonder if you'll just give us a précis off the bat before we jump into it. And I wonder if you caught any of my monologue in the last segment, just talking about how not just do you outline, Antifa and BLM as effectively one and the same now, but domestic terror groups, but that actually left-wing institutions are pushing for Biden to embrace these groups as his base, Dr. Peterson.
Yes, I mean, the basic point here is that most people in the country still do not realize, because of the way in which the media has muddied things and hidden the truth, that BLM and Antifa both want the destruction of America as we know it. And what has happened is, it's happened in the past, is that the Democratic Party refuses to acknowledge that they are allowing these riots and this insurrection, and they're allowing a movement that is avowedly Marxist, that actually hates Joe Biden and wants to destroy him too, but sees Joe Biden as their useful idiot. And of course, Biden and Harris refuse to condemn BLM or Antifa by name. And that's by design. You have two different groups on the left trying to use each other, and America hangs in the balance.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and what a way to put it. I want to start off with what you say here in your first paragraph, Dr. Peterson. You say Black Lives Matter does not represent the old civil rights movement. Now, if I were in, around, or supportive of Black Lives Matter, I would say to you, that's not up to you to white-splain. What would you say to them?
Well, thankfully, the pigmentation of our skin doesn't have much to do with being able to make a reasonable argument. They're two separate things. And since I'm not a racialist, I don't really think it matters, what race someone is when they explain this. Look, this is by BLM's own admission, though. This is not anyone coming in and describing and telling them what they are. What I say is take them seriously. They do not like the version of civil rights that most Americans remember as being promulgated by Martin Luther King. They, in fact, stand against the notion of equality under law. They think that any kind of inequality in America can be explained by racism, particularly of white people. And so if any inequality is due to racism, this means for BLM that as opposed to our Constitution, which upholds equality of the individual under law, we need to have a hierarchy, a new Jim Crow, a racial caste system, where the law isn't colorblind, but in fact tells America how it should organize itself based on race. It really is a kind of Jim Crow in reverse.
What a great way. You've got a way with summaries, Dr. Peterson. You talk about the political language that we use at the moment, and I think we're all a bit guilty of this in the political field, of using language that might be very familiar to us, but both isn't familiar to people outside of sort of Washington, D.C. or think tank circles writ large, because I know you're not a D.C. guy, but you also say much of the political language of both Republicans and Democrats is drawn from the Cold War, but it has lost its salience, particularly for those under 50. Would you expand on that for us?
Yeah, so one of the problems is that you see lots of people on the right call BLM Marxist. They'll call BLM communist. But a lot of young people don't know what Marxism is. And I think this is a problem today because older people are so used to the right calling the left Marxist that we've sort of forgotten what is actually transpiring in front of our eyes. And so what matters is not whether we use the word Marxist or communism or leftist. What matters is that people understand what these groups actually believe and what they're trying to accomplish.
I think a lot of people as well are struggling to figure out why. I mean, you mentioned the Democrat Party now being the party of American oligarchs, and you go on to say that you go on to call sort of the BLM and the Antifa crowd an elite-funded effort to destabilize the American way of life as we have known it, to overhaul the principles of our justice system, put identities above equal individual rights, the erosion of private property, the destruction of traditional families and moral culture. I think most people would agree with your thesis on that, but the question that I think a lot of people struggle to answer, I struggle to answer a lot, is why? Why do these American oligarchs want that? Why do these American oligarchs hate the traditional family? Why do they hate the same institutions and the same history that has actually allowed them to become these oligarchs?
Yeah, so I would make a distinction between a lot of the foundations that supported Black Lives Matter from the beginning, which have always had a very hard left bent to them. And they're sort of useful in some ways to what I'd call the elite or the ruling class in general, right? I mean, there's kind of a ruling class mentality in general that really just wants to stay in power, right? And may or may not be ideological. And so at present, I would say the driving force in America, I mean, the people who are in charge of these companies that are giving millions of dollars to BLM right now, they see this as a power play. This is a way to divide the rest of the country. This is a way to stave off complaints about them, because otherwise, I mean, already BLM and Antifa, right, they're putting guillotines outside of Jeff Bezos' house. Eventually, they will come for the oligarchs. But the oligarchs see it as useful to sort of buy them off and divide America. And then there also are, there's a lot of sources of foundation money, especially, that has gone to these groups where some of them actually just share BLM's Marxist agenda. I mean, they really do want to fundamentally transform America. So yeah, I think there's a distinction when you look at the ruling class between kind of the ruling class generally, which wants to buy off BLM and keep minorities afraid and voting for Democrats to maintain power, and then intimidate the rest of us. And then there's the folks who actually support BLM because they really do want to fundamentally remake America.
Do you believe that the oligarchs will be eaten last by the crocodile, or do you think that they will be able to buy off? I mean, you see, I think you mentioned in your article about these big corporate banners that are hanging from all these buildings just across the street from us here in downtown DC. You have this huge Black Lives Matter sign hanging from the National Geographic building, while across the street at the other National Geographic building, it's all boarded up. You can't go in. You can't see through the windows. You can't access the doors. Are the oligarchs fooling themselves, or do you think they might have some leverage in the long run?
I think that they have a problem on their hands. And I think you see this right now in the polling, the changes in polling when it comes to Trump, right? Making a rise, making a play. The problem is that they cannot control these groups. Joe Biden cannot control it. Joe Biden just condemned violence. Is the civic unrest and violence going to stop? I don't think so. I think he's lost control. Of course, he's lost control of his mental faculties probably quite some time ago. But I think the Democratic Party is not actually in control of these folks anymore. And you have to understand, they don't necessarily like each other. They're using each other, right, these forces. But the idea that doddering old Nancy Pelosi or Joe Biden is going to tell the leaders of BLM or Antifa what to do, I think the cat's out of the bag. They opened Pandora's box, as I said in another article, and they let deep-rooted fear and anger start flowing through the population, and it's out of their hands at this point. Now, of course, they will try to channel and control it, but I don't think at this point it's up to them.
You mentioned that these left-wing leaders have kind of opened up Pandora's box with this all. Do you have a prescription as to why? Was it desperation for political power? Was it calculation? I mean, AOC continues to run circles. Her candidates that she endorses continue to run circles around Nancy Pelosi's candidates. We saw another one just over the last 24 hours. So what caused them to do it? And I'm curious. I know I'm sort of repeating the last question, but I'm curious as to whether or not there is a way for them to put the genie back in the bottle.
Well, I think what's clear is, look, BLM does this every summer, right? I mean, every year they're looking for video clips to take out of context, to incite, civic unrest and make people uncomfortable. That's their MO. That's what they've done every year. The difference was, and riots were entirely predictable. I don't think I'm, a prophet, but in April, it became clear to me that the probability of riots this summer was very high because of the lockdowns. You had just flooded, the economic situation with unemployed people, right? And you locked everyone up for a long time. The idea that there'd be riots wasn't too hard to figure out, I think, for anyone who was looking into the tea leaves. What happened, though, is that BLM found the perfect video this summer when it comes to George Floyd, because it was so awful. It was so hard to watch. It was so terrible. And it came right during election season. So every elite, every establishment Democrat leapt on board, and you would have paved the way for riots and unrest with the unemployment and the lockdowns. And so the timing was great. And so, your establishment Democrats seized onto it, and they were in a frenzy, of course, before COVID, because they were very worried about losing this election. And so, the timing of that video was perfect, and it got out of control very fast. They showed no restraint at all. They essentially, the message right now that the left has been giving in these Democrat-won cities, and the left at the top with Pelosi and Biden, is if you go out and commit violence, quote unquote, for racial justice, we won't do anything. And it's okay. Please go out there. And of course, most Black Americans don't even agree with defunding the police. BLM does not represent most Black Americans. And that's just true. You can look at the polls. But what's happened in a very short period of time is that in a frenzy, the establishment said, please, riot, protest, we will support you. And a lot of bad people who've been wanting to do this for a very long time now have hundreds of millions of dollars, and the riots will continue on into January.
And Kamala Harris is sort of backing it and endorsing it and telling them that this is all, de rigueur, par for the course. I said in my monologue. They intend to lay siege, their words, not mine, to the White House, starting on September the 17th. But it's all in this Transition Integrity Project's document. It's all in their planning. It's all been laid out, and they've been working on this. The organization itself was founded in December of 2019. Well, we'll be getting a lot more into the Transition Integrity Project at the end of this show with Natalie Winters and with our new investigations into who they are, who they give money to, and some of their emails from some years ago that have come out. But Dr. Peterson, I want to hang on to you for another segment if you'll stick around. We've got a break to go to, but I want to make sure you stick around because after the break, you keep using the word racialist, and you use the word racialist in the article a number of times too. I wrote about the distinction between the phrases racist and racialist and the nuances there in my book from 2 years ago now. Enoch Was Right, about this British politician Enoch Powell, who I think everybody needs to learn about and learn about what he was warning about. I'll try and make sure we get the image of Enoch Was Right up on the screen when we come back from the break. But I also want to thank all of you. So many people out there have joined up to be supporters of the National Pulse and our investigations over the course of the last 24 hours alone. Some very familiar names in there as well. I know a lot of you out there, and we thank you for your support. You can continue your support over at thenationalpulse.com/support. You can do that in the break, and we'll be back in just about 2 minutes with more from Dr. Matthew Peterson, the Claremont Institute, and the American Mind. We'll see you in just a second. I'm quoting here from Dr. Matthew Peterson's incredible article, and sometimes these things can be incredibly long, but somehow Dr. Peterson has managed to succinctly state a lot of what needs to be known about these radical Marxist terrorists. The article is called The Racial Marxism of BLM, and it's available on the American Mind website. And make sure you bookmark the American Mind. It's just such a great read, day in and day out. Really challenging stuff that appears up on the American Mind, really thought-provoking, and pushes the boundaries, quite frankly, way away from establishment right-wing news organizations like the National Review. The American Mind is really on the forefront of conservatism, traditionalism, the America First movement. I want to quote here from this article. Dr. Peterson says, "They have now achieved what their teachers and mentors could never dream of. A violent, destabilizing insurrection masquerading as a popular civil rights movement with the support of a major political party and nearly every major cultural institution in the nation. The establishment left still thinks it could control the movement, but it's clear what will happen to them if they do not. There's a reason protesters keep putting guillotines outside of Jeff Bezos's house." Dr. Peterson, they were also last night outside Mayor Muriel Bowser's house after the shooting of a young man who apparently had a gun on him in southeast Washington, D.C., and we're expecting more riots and looting and protests to come here in Washington, D.C. as a result over the next couple of days. But I want to get back to your point there and then ask you this question also. Why do you keep saying racialist? You said you're not a racialist, and therefore, the idea, the concept of white-splaining means nothing to you. Just explain to us, because it's kind of a term that's fallen out of use in recent years.
Well, I mean, you have your own thoughts on this, perhaps. The first thing I'd say is the idea of racism, the word racism, has really been spoiled. It's overused. It's unclear to people what that even means at this point, in large part because the left calls everyone and everything racist. But when I say racialist, I mean people who look at human beings as fundamentally being part of different races, right? So instead of seeing everyone who is human being equal insofar as they are human, the Claremont's long-held doctrine about the Declaration of Independence. I mean, what the Declaration meant was, insofar as people are human, they're created equal in some fundamental capacity. And for those who look at human beings and see them as really classified by race in some fundamental way, that's what I'd mean by racialist. And it really, it's not just race, of course, right? These are also people who want to divide us based on sexual orientation, and they'll keep adding to their identity groups. And so when they look around and look at human beings, I mean, they're seeing, well, this person it partakes in whiteness, right? Because they are white. To me, that's racialism.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. There's a lot more to discuss in this, but I know we're running out of time here, and we're very grateful for your time, Dr. Matthew Peterson. Just two major big things I want to ask you. Number one, you say, worse, outside of President Trump, many in the Republican Party are still too cowardly to denounce these people, even as America burns. Why are some people in the Republican Party still too cowardly? I agree with you, but I don't get it.
It's very sad, and it's probably one of the most important issues that we face between now and Election Day. And really, there's a simple answer and a more complex answer. The simple answer is no politician wants to denounce a group called Black Lives Matter. Why? Because Black Lives Matter is, in fact, lying about America. We are not racist. Black Lives Matter is holding America hostage, weaponizing, if you will, America's lack of racism. America is not racist, does not want to be called racist. They're not proud of that. They think racism is bad, right? So no one wants to be called racist. So they've done a great job in framing things such that politicians are afraid to say Black Lives Matter is a bad organization because they don't want to be called racist. That's the simple answer. The more complex answer, however, is that a lot of our politicians simply do not understand what is now happening in America. And to give you the obvious example for anyone who fancies themselves American first is Trump. When Trump is quiet, who else takes his place? Trump was quiet for a while about these riots. There were no other leaders standing up. Mitt Romney was marching with these folks. So we really have a leadership class problem in the Republican Party where I don't think a lot of them actually understand what's going on. I don't think they're watching live feeds every night that the savvy online people are watching. And they're either too cowardly or too ignorant to say anything. And I think that what we do see is that the base does understand this. And increasingly, more Americans understand what's going on. And they are going to shame the politicians who are cowardly or ignorant. And I think they're never going to elect folks like this again. I think you're seeing a radicalization of the base. And I think that moving forward, we will look for politicians who have the courage and the intelligence to call out radical extremist groups that are literally burning things down in front of our eyes.
Well, Dr. Peterson, we've got about 90 seconds left here, and my second question for you is just please tell the audience about the Claremont Institute, about the American Mind, and where they can follow and subscribe and all of the rest.
So the Claremont Institute for 40 years has worked on recovering the principles of the American founding and applying them in a way that makes sense for our day and age. That's claremont.org. The publication that I founded along with James Polis is called The American Mind, americanmind.org. And the essay that Raheem is very generously talking about today is actually an introduction to a number of articles we published this week on the connection between Black Lives Matter and Marxism.
And Dr. Matthew Peterson, where can they follow you specifically on Twitter, on whatever social media? What's your handle?
I'm at DocMJP, D-O-C, DocMJP on Twitter, and AmericanMind.org.
Well, we'll make sure to tweet out the clips from this interview as well after the show, and we'll tag you so that everybody can find Dr. Matthew Peterson, a real brilliant American mind in and of himself, and we're really grateful for his time here on the National Pulse today. When we come back, Natalie Winters will be walking us through what she's found and what's in her American mind about the Transition Integrity Project. We'll be back in just a second. Well, they say if you want anything done right, you got to do it yourself. the whole Transition Integrity Project document was supposed to be on the National Pulse website with all my notes during this show, but we'll make sure it goes up immediately afterwards. Clearly, Natalie Winters was busy with something else in the intervening period. I did mention my book, Enoch Was Right. I know a lot of you guys haven't previously seen that, so I want to put that on the screen there. It is available on Amazon. Enoch Was Right. It's I think a short but informative read about something that a much maligned politician from the United Kingdom was trying to warn us about as it pertained to immigration and indeed racial division that was going to be stoked in both our country and yours here in the United States. He was a prophet in that sense. 1968, he gave the famous speech. So make sure you go and get a copy of Enoch Was Right. But if you support the National Pulse, by the way, by going to thenationalpulse.com/support, you actually get a free signed copy of my book, and along with a nice hat, a red hat, and a monthly town hall with both Natalie Winters and myself. So make sure nationalpulse.com/support, or you can go to fundrealnews.com. We also own that. All right, speaking of real news, Natalie, you've been going through some of the documents that pertain to this Transition Integrity Project, and I know people are going to get bored of me saying that term between now and the election, but this is everything right here, and it's everything because they've given their playbook away. I'm not sure if this was ever supposed to be published, but a news outlet did accidentally publish it on their website, or include a report to it on their a link to it on their website. We've ripped it down. It's now being circulated. It was circulated, of course, by the President of the United States in a linked story the other day. So I want to go through this, but not just through this document. People will be able to do that on their own time. There is so much. By the way, let's get a close-up here. Okay, there is so much in this thing, okay? Like, this is not lightweight stuff, but it's stuff that is so important to the functioning of the Republic, the functioning of the United States, the functioning of the Constitution, the Electoral College, and all of that stuff. But let's go and look at who's behind this project, because follow the money is such an important part. So where have we followed the money to, Natalie?
Sure. So the founder of the Transition Integrity Project is Rosa Brooks. Now, we've highlighted how she has extensive links to George Soros, both serving on the board of his foundation, Open Society Institute, and actually serving as his general counsel before she joined the Obama administration.
Stop. I thought all this George Soros stuff was just conspiracy theory.
No, and it's interesting when you read that 22-page report, the words bipartisan, nonpartisan seem to occur interchangeably almost every page countless times. And again, this really harkens back to what we saw during impeachment, during the Russia collusion hoax, where these words bipartisan, nonpartisan really fall flat. They're really smoke signals for anti-Trump and these establishment figures who they don't like President Trump because he does not represent their interests. But interestingly enough, a few months before the Transition Integrity Project was created, Rosa Brooks was funneling thousands of dollars to candidate Joe Biden.
What do you mean funneling?
Per FEC records, which is the Federal Election Commission, she was donating, I believe it was $2,800 one month, almost $1,000 another month, to his political action committee known as Biden for President.
That sounds very nonpartisan to me.
And interestingly enough, in the almost 15 years preceding, she had donated upwards of $16,500 to other Democratic candidates, including Barack Obama, including Hillary Clinton.
That sounds very nonpartisan to me. It's extraordinary. And in the next segment as well, I want to get into what Facebook did and said this morning, because you made mention of the impeachment and how they tried this sort of veneer of bipartisanship or nonpartisan impeachment witnesses. One of those was Pamela Karlan, right? And there's a horrible clip of Pamela Karlan being really racist against white people that we saw and that we actually unearthed over at the War Room. And I wanted to get into that because doesn't Pamela Karlan sit on the Facebook oversight board?
Yes, the oversight board, which we have a story up from months ago where I believe it was almost 95% hardcore anti-Trump, radical left-wing, in some cases Marxist activists who've compared President Trump to Hitler, who've wanted to get him removed from Twitter. The list goes on.
But now Facebook is abiding by the strictures and the diktats of the Transition Integrity Project. Mark Zuckerberg announced this morning that Facebook will attempt to suppress information either from candidates or from candidate supporters that claim victory on election night. So they're saying that if you're President Trump's Facebook page, or you're a supporter of President Trump on Facebook, and if you try and claim that President Trump has won the election on election night, that they will suppress your content downwards.
Exactly, and it goes back to what you said in your opening about how Nils Gilman, another founder of the Transition Integrity Project, said that the decisions about the election, who's going to win, will inevitably fall to people like Mark Zuckerberg, people like the Murdochs, who we know are advocates for open borders, are advocates against President Trump, and they're using their platforms with reach to millions, if not tens of millions of Americans, to ensure that a Biden victory is secured.
Right. The evening anchors over there at the Murdoch station may be great. The Tucker Carlsons, the Laura Ingrams, great people, great friends of mine. But that doesn't tell you a lot about the organization, the institution, and the management themselves. You only have to go so far as to realize that Paul Ryan is on the board over there, to realize where that network is going and is trying to go. In the next segment, stay tuned and pay very close attention, because here's the thing. We're not here to fill up part of your day or to try and entertain you over the course of this hour, entertaining though we may be, or though we think we may be. But we're here to inform you, and we're here to make sure that you take action, that you are an informed citizen, that you take the information that you're learning about. And by the way, don't even take our word for it. If there's something you're skeptical of, if there's something you're not sure about, we can go to thenationalpulse.com and look at our reporting and all the links and all the citations and all the documents that we include there. And if you're not sure, again, go somewhere else, do your own research, and figure out who's saying what. Again, follow the money. It's not hard to figure out where a lot of this stuff is coming from. If you see, a PolitiFact fact check or a Media Matters fact check on one of our articles, you know that those organizations are funded by far-left open borders groups. And you know that we are funded by you, that we rely on you. So who has more independence about them? Who has more integrity about them? And the word integrity is something we're going to hear an awful lot about in the next coming months. In the next segment, we'll get into some of that integrity, because Rosa Brooks has been emailing with, I think, John Podesta. Is that right, Natalie? Oh, sounds bipartisan to me. We'll get back to it after this break. Welcome back to the National Pulse. Straight back to Natalie Winters on this one. We only have a few minutes left to go here on the show, and I want to make sure we cover this all in earnest. And we will be covering it over and over and over again, because Natalie, this isn't the only organization that's out here doing this, and it's not the only document that's out there about it. But the viewers will recognize, if you turn on CNN, if you read the New York Times today, everyone's talking about this now. But we've been on it for over a month. We know what's going on here. We know the background of all the people. So let's tell the audience more. What have you found out about Rosa Brooks? Who is Rosa Brooks again, just very quickly?
Yes.
And what have you found out about her emails with John Podesta? And just remind us who John Podesta is too.
Sure. So again, Rosa Brooks founded the Transition Integrity Project. And like I said, she was previously on staff at George Soros's Open Society Institute and now sits on the board.
Was she a senior counsel?
Yes. And later she joined the Obama administration. So both of those...
So this isn't some intern who spent 3 months at the Open Society Foundation?
No. Both of those positions are certainly kill shots to any facade of objectivity or impartiality or bipartisanship, as they would say. But interestingly enough, in 2015, there's an email thread between her, John Podesta, and Jake Sullivan. So to reset, yes.
2013.
2015.
2015.
Maybe I misspoke.
So,
yes.
Brooks, Podesta, and Sullivan.
Yes.
So we know who Brooks is. Who's Podesta?
So Podesta is a mainstay in Democratic politics. He was deputy chief of staff in Bill Clinton's White House. He served as counsel to Barack Obama. He served as chairman of Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign.
He's the top dog. He's the top strategist.
Exactly. So it's not surprising that he was the one who was chosen to play Biden in the Transition Integrity Project's war game simulation, where they
Who would know Biden better?
Exactly. And actually, someone who would know Biden better is the third person on the email chain. That's Jake Sullivan. So he served as deputy chief of staff to Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State, but he also was Joe Biden's national security advisor when he was vice president. And Foreign Policy magazine had identified him as not only currently advising the Biden campaign on matters of national security, but also comprising really the foundational bedrock for what a Biden administration, should he win, look like in terms of foreign policy.
Yeah, I mean, Jake's his lead guy, right? I mean, Jake is the guy who is out there defending Biden against all the charges that he faces with regards to his involvement with China, with Ukraine, and more. I mean, Jake is really the architect behind all of this. So you're telling me the three of these are in email chains together?
Exactly. So,
but I thought Rosa Brooks was non-partisan. What are they saying? Is it a non-partisan and non-friendly email? That would be okay, right?
Well, it certainly doesn't seem nonpartisan given the title of the email, which is, quote, following up on conversation at Soros dinner. So Rosa Brooks is essentially being wined and dined by George Soros. Also in attendance is John Podesta and Jake Sullivan, people who are not only affiliated with the Transition Integrity Project, but like I said, bigwigs in Democratic politics, and really the wing of the Democratic Party that is establishment, that is fundamentally opposed to President Trump. But on this email thread, you see Rosa Brooks offer her support to John Podesta, this email, again, was May of 2015, about 3 months after Podesta had departed the Obama White House to join the Hillary Clinton campaign effort. So Rosa Brooks was essentially offering her support, whether it be op-eds, legal advice, to Podesta to help out with the campaign effort.
Huh. Do we have that verbatim?
Yes, I could read.
Please read it for us.
Sure. Let me know if there's anything I can do to be helpful to you and Jake. You've got plenty of talent you can tap already, but I can be of help either on substantive matters or on the strategy communication side. Please let me know. I'm on sabbatical as of a few weeks from now, so have more free time than usual, and I'm happy to do appropriate penance for past sins of snarkiness. And I think even the opening line to the email, which is, John, nice to see you at George's, and sorry to pepper you with plaintive, but what's the big idea questions? I'm glad you're at the helm of this particular ship. It's particularly damning and also shows that this relationship, both between Rosa Brooks, George Soros, and John Podesta, is extensive. They weren't just meeting for the first time.
That is absolutely damning information that, as Natalie describes it, is a total kill shot to any claim of non-partisanship from Rosa Brooks or the Transition Integrity Project. And ladies and gentlemen, mark it down in your calendars, in your schedules, in your diaries, on your phones for November the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th and the 6th and so on. Because every single day you're going to hear from these non-partisan experts, and Rosa Brooks is going to try and appear as one of them. What Natalie just read us was an email chain that showed that not only are these people in open cahoots, they're social friends. They're a close-knit family. These Democrats in Washington, D.C., who have been here for decades upon decades upon decades. And they claim that President Trump, a relative newcomer to politics and to Washington, D.C., is the problem and is creating all the problems that we see all around the country. You've got 4 years in office for one guy and 45, 47 years at the helm for the other, but the 4 years guy is to blame? The structural problems that the left claims we have comes from the guy who's been in for 4 years, not the guy who's been there for 47 years? And how many years do they have between them, all of these people serving in Washington, D.C.? How many years for Rosa Brooks and Jake Sullivan and Joe Biden and John Podesta and the whole team? But we're supposed to believe that it's Trump and Trump's team that have caused the problems that the country faces today. We'll mark it in your diaries as well for in about an hour and a half's time from this live show, 3 p.m. on Thursday. We'll have more stories up on thenationalpulse.com specifically pertaining to Rosa Brooks and her donations to political parties, to political candidates, and specifically that email thread between Brooks and Podesta and Sullivan. We break real news here. We do real investigations. We follow the money. We show you where to look. We show you where the nefarious activity comes from. And that's why we need your support. Your support over at thenationalpulse.com/support, but also your support in making sure that these clips reach so many people. You follow us on Twitter at The National Pulse, follow America's Voice. Make sure you're downloading the America's Voice app, and make sure you're getting the Pluto app so you can watch it on there. Recommend us to your friends. Send this out to everyone out there. I want to say a big thank you to Natalie Winters. Also a big thank you to Dr. Matthew Peterson. Make sure you're watching tonight's live coverage right here on America's Voice.